Hello everybody, welcome to Technique Tuesday. Today we are going to make a flip flap card which works with having a little pull mechanism. This is the front. This is the inside front. That's the flip flap part, and then it is also a card, so you could stamp and put another message in here. Of course you could just do it as a postcard and use just a quarter size of cardstock, but I do like to send full-size cards. So here's the flip, there's the flap, and there's the inside. So without further ado, we'll get started, and as always the dimensions and any pertinent instructions will be in the description at the bottom. So we started with a piece of garden green cardstock, which is 8.5 by 5.5, scored at 4 1/4, and that just gets folded in half. Or if you're going to do the postcard, it's just 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I have a piece of designer series paper, which is from my increasingly favorite Gingham Cottage collection, and then we have a little strip which is 6 by 1 1/2, and it's scored at 2 and 2 1/2. Then got 2 pieces of crumb cake, which is 2 1/4 and 3 inches. That's pretty much all of the basics that make the mechanism. So let's get started and let's get it built. So we do need to do a little bit of stamping first. What I did was, I'm using this fabulous collection, Ringed with Nature stamp set. There's a cut and emboss tree rings, which is just so fabulous. It's just this, it just cuts out all bark rings, and then this is the die cut which lays over where you've cut them, and it's also got all these lovely little extra leaves and embellishments. There's I was going to say a pine cone, there's an acorn, all sorts of lovely things. This is pretty universal. You could do welcome to the neighborhood, you could use it for Christmas, you could use it for fall, you could use it for masculine cards. I just think it's a great collection. So what we need to do was, I'm not going to make you sit through it, I embossed a sheet in soft suede of all these little knobby bits, and this is, it embosses them. Just, there's all sorts of different sizes and little levels of gnarliness. And then what I used was, I stamped the rings on crumb cake with the soft suede, and then I went back with the die cut and used one of the smaller inside ones and just cut some pieces. I didn't want to emboss it because I wanted to stamp on it, and that would make it harder, but you still get the effect if you put the stamped one on the embossed one. So I cut those out. I then went back with some garden green and, oops, oh, I can't even think what the colour of this is called, cherry cobbler. So I cut out some green leaves in the garden green and some cherry cobbler berries, and that's what I needed to make the front piece. So oops, let me just get those out of the way. And those of you who watched my videos before know when I grew up in England, we had the TV show Blue Peter, where when they were doing crafts in their 5-minute segment, they'd always had one that was made earlier, and this part is no different. So here's one I made earlier. Like I say, I stamped it with the rings, cut it with the smaller embossing size, and then I went ahead and stamped Just For You in the cherry cobbler, and then all these little pieces that I'd cut, I just went ahead and glued them on. So that's the concept of what we need. And then I'm going to take this and attach it to the embossed part. So like I say, it was flat for stamping and nubbly for the embossed part. And then I'm just going to stamp the love and warmth on the inside using the cherry cobbler. Oops. smaller piece is the inside. So we'll have some love and warmth because we are lovely people. What can I say? So we'll pop that back in, and then one of the pieces that I had cut out with the die in the garden green, I'm just going to go ahead and glue that into place. I'm going to be using the Mono multi-purpose liquid glue just because it gives a nice fine little tip, and you can put nice little dots just enough where you want it. I was doing it on the silicone pad, so in case any squidged out anywhere, it didn't go all over my work surface. So that's the inside piece done. Another thing I'm going to do with the front before it all gets assembled is I'm going to take the quarter piece of sponge, which I've shown you in previous videos. It's just one sponge cut into quarters because we want to use the straight edge just to get some colour on the edges. If you use the rounded part of the sponge, sometimes it can just be a little bit too much, but if you pull down on the straight edge, you just get this nice little edging, which is what we wanted for this card. So that's more or less all the inking parts done. Now we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of assembling. And the designer series paper is cut 4 3/4 by 3.5. The reason I made it slightly smaller is when the handle sticks out the side, if you make it go too far to the edge, you wouldn't be able to see it. And then if you had the tag that you pull sticking out too far, it wouldn't always necessarily fit into a postcard sized envelope, you know, the invitation sized envelope for mailing. So made it a little smidge smaller. So what I'm going to use the old label punch because it's the one I had. I know lots of videos I've seen have suggested other methods. If you don't have a punch, you can just cut it with your paper cutter or even just with a pair of scissors. It needs to be about 1.5 inches in, and it's 2 1/4 inches, 2 inches long, and it needs to be about 3/8 of an inch wide. So that sort of mimics the dimensions of what you could punch out. So this is the little mechanism. Like I say, it was scored at 2 inches and it was scored at 2.5. My punch isn't very long, so instead of it being 2 by 6, I actually just cut it down a little bit. So I'm going to pop that in as far as it will go and cut the piece out. You will notice that it's not actually in the middle, but it doesn't matter because this piece is so big, you can just center this over where you need it to be. So what we need to do now is go ahead on the first piece on the 2 inch length up to the first score mark. We just need to put adhesive on this little section. And normally we put adhesive on the piece that's being stuck on, but in this instance we know this is as big as it's going to get, and it's going to get fully covered by the inside piece. So we're just going to line it up and pop it on. Then this is the piece that will pull and move. So in order for it to be a little bit more secure on the 1/2 inch strip, I don't know if you can see that between the 2 score lines, I'm actually going to use tear and tape just because it's going to be moving quite a bit and you don't want it to come unstuck. So I'll put a little bit on and remove the backing, and then just put an extra little bit on. The reason I had to remove the backing first was because it's wider. 2 pieces would have been wider than the amount that we have allowed. So now we're going to fold it so you can see this sticky and attach this piece to that flap, and it needs to go right up to the edge. It can't hang over because then it won't fold when you do the pulling. So that's how it looks, and now we're going to get it stuck to the card. So it's going to go through the hole, and then what we're going to do is on this side of just the smaller under layer where this section ends, we are going to put a piece of tearing tape. Having just said, but let's put that off to one side, we don't need it anymore. Come back, all is forgiven. So tearing tape right up to the edge of the smaller piece, not the big piece that needs to be able to move, but the small piece is actually going to be stuck down. So before you remove the backing tape though, you just need to be sure that you have it centered where you want it to be. So you can kind of play with it, look at it, make sure it's all even. Best idea is just to make sure the two pieces of designer series paper at both sides are even. And then once you're happy, this isn't going anywhere yet, so it's just for a visual, just to be sure you're happy with it and to make sure that it's lined up straight. Then what you need to do is remove the backing paper, fold it as a whole, can see this, and then so that it's even on both sides, we're going to press it down. So that is going to hold that in place, and then when you pull the mechanism, it's going to pop over. That's why we couldn't have this overhang any further than the fold in the pulling flap. So lots of videos I saw had this little pulling flap angled and looked quite fancy. I don't have any of those. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my corner rounder, or you could even do this by hand, and just round those two corners just to try and make them look a little bit nicer. Nothing wrong with straight edges, but sometimes if you can make it look fancy, why would you not? Ooh. Well, that didn't work, Alyson, did it? It's not exactly fancy looking. Sorry. Old goods. Trying to be helpful. Not being very successful at it. Oh. Let me use a good old pair of scissors and round it by hand, because isn't that what I said in the beginning? There we go. And then the last thing we need to do is pop a little hole in the edge, and then take some twine, probably 5 inches, and then if you fold it in half and thread it through from the front, and then open the loop that you've put through and tuck the tails in, it will look quite nice. And then we can just go ahead and trim the excess off so they're all nice and even. So that's how the mechanism is going to work. Now what we need to do is we need to stick it to the card front, but what you need to be aware of is we can't put anything here because otherwise it will stop this moving. So again, with the tearing tape that I said we didn't need, I'm going to put tearing tape above, a little bit further down, and just some behind. I just feel it will give it a little bit more of a secure area to tug against. And then we can just use regular adhesive to fasten the corners down, but again, nothing down here other than what's gone to the edge. So we'll pull off the backing tape, and attach that nice and centrally. So now when you pull it, it works, it's alive. And then the last step was to go ahead and attach the little wooden block that we had made. I'm going to add a little bit of bling just because I can. These are actually wonderful gems. They were from last Christmas, but Stampin' Up just have so many. I've just got mountains of bling. It's like, give me bling, give me bling. So it doesn't really matter what you use as long as it looks pretty and you are happy with it. So we'll put one up here, put a little one down at the bottom, and of course these being red and gold, they match. I didn't want them to be too sort of rhinestoney because the wood has got a bit more of a rustic look. But there you have it. Flip, flap. Inside for writing lots of messages. You could put a piece of lighter cardstock if you want. I think garden green is just on the cusp of being light enough that you could stamp something and still have your writing seen. It's not like it's black or night of navy or anything. So I think that's a really nice card. It's a great way to use the rings of love and get that going, because I was so excited just to try and cut it out. So thank you so much for watching.